about the straightforward economic ones than I would be about social and political ones. Why do I say that? I think, on the one hand, the economic problems are big and real. I think the challenge to build an economy more based around consumption is a very big challenge. I think the challenge to deal with the currency is also a big challenge. And I think on top of that, you have all the many reforms to do with banking, to do with state-owned enterprises, to do with all those things that you saw in the World Bank report, which came out last week, and also the problems to do with capital liberalisation, which we saw in the leaked, or I suppose dribbled out proposal from the central bank also last week. So those are big problems. But all the same, if I was running China at this precise moment, and I had to think of numbers that worried me, I would come up with 5 numbers, only one of which is a straightforward economic statistic. The first number would be 38 million, and that is the number of people who moved from the countryside to the towns in the period between 2000 and 2005. That does not only includes a bit going from rural provinces to cities in other provinces. It does not include, it only measures the hukou holders. It does not include all the people who also moved within provinces. By any measure, once you begin to look at this from a global perspective, this is migration on an astronomical level. Just to give you a rough comparison, more people moved in those 5 years in China than moved across the Atlantic in the 100 years before 1920, in the process that built, I suppose, the modern United States. From the point of view of somebody trying to run China, that is an immense and difficult figure to deal with. You're probably dealing with as many as 200 million people altogether who've moved from the countries to the cities. That is a social problem, and is one which takes a lot of political fixing by any measure, let alone in this country. The second number, which would intrigue me, and this number one can never will have to deal with. You have the problems of nationalism on both sides. You have all the different disagreements between China, India, Japan, the Koreas, and that is even before we introduce the relationships with America. My fourth number is 40%. That is the amount that local provincial governments here rely on land sales for local revenues. That strikes me as something that is unsustainable from the point of view of trying to run governments. You cannot rely on property sales always to bring in the amount of money, and the level and the structure of Chinese government will probably have to be changed to deal with it. And finally, my last statistic, somewhat closer to a straightforward economic one, and we were just talking about it, would be $13,000. And that is the level of income per head at which South Korea and Taiwan went much more democratic. So those would be 5 statistics, only one of which is, I would argue, a straightforward economic one. But all of them, I think, have economic ramifications. And all of them, I think, from the point of view of trying to run China for the next 10 years, would sit there as reasons to worry me. That does not mean that I think China is running into automatic problems, but it does mean that not just in terms of the party here, but also in terms of all the Western companies that I go and see at the moment. When I wander in and I meet them, nearly always they show me a page in their annual report, or a slide on their PowerPoint. And I would always call it the China page, and it always shows at the bottom left-hand corner a number which is their sales in China at the moment, and then it just goes up like that to the top right-hand corner, which shows their sales in China in 2025. I remain very optimistic about China, but I do not, I see the path from here to there as being somewhat more wavy and uncoordinated than many Western companies do. And for that matter, I suspect people sometimes looking for jobs here. Why do all these things matter? Why throw a group of people studying economics, why throw so much politics and social things into the mix? Because I think both in terms of China and in terms of the outside world, we are one of those phases of history where things change. For people of my generation, pretty much everything that has happened over the past, or happened until very recently, in terms of politics from a business point of view, has been good. If you look at the period from, say, 1975 all the way up to 2008, virtually everything, and particularly if you look at globally, but also particularly if you look at China, most of the developments were positive. The wildest amount of things could happen, strange things could happen, the Soviet Union could go, China could open up, Latin America could start liberalizing, but most of the surprises that came into the business world were ones that were good. There were a few shocks like 9/11, but on the whole, anyone who ran a big company had this force behind them which was pushing that company ahead, and where politics could be put, the social problems could be put to one side. I suspect now, both in terms of the West and in terms of China, those sort of problems are going to become a much bigger part of life. In the end, if you look at human history, yes, you have economic logic, yes, you have technology, and you can have great phases of human history where those alone are enough, and those are the ones that my magazine tends to celebrate and push. The great period of globalization, which went from about 1870 all the way up to the First World War, the huge period of globalization we had up to the credit crunch. But there are also other periods of history where you see politics and you see irrational things coming back in. And that is where my paranoia at this precise moment sits. So for all those reasons, I would, as I said at the beginning, be basically optimistic at the moment. You have a huge wind behind you as you go out into the outside world. You have a huge force behind you in terms, particularly I think in here, of that emerging middle class, wanting to get things, wanting to push ahead, wanting opening up to continue. But I think you should, at the back of your brain, at least keep one eye on these various things that could go very wrong with the world, and not all of which are located within the straightforward world of economics. So on that note, I will end, but as I said, I'm very happy to take questions on anything that you want to ask me about.